And joining us in the studio is a former presidential candidate of the African Action Congress, AAC, Mr. Omoyele Sowore. It's good to have you join us in the studio.
Thank you for bringing me.
All right. So, of course, I'm sure that, you know, except you do not live in Nigeria or you do not listen to the news, you obviously know what's happening in the country. Yes. Now, looking at that letter from the former president, he's one to write a lot of open letters, but should we, in this case, be shooting the messenger and not taking the message?
Well, I think it's important that we don't shoot the messenger. He has a right to write the letter he wrote. My issue with some of these letters and the people writing letters is that they, at one point or the other, had a chance to have made Nigeria a better place some 20 years back, and they did nothing or probably did worse. So progressively, Nigeria goes down, and former president, like I've been quoted as saying, the former presidents are always better than the current presidents, so that's why they write all these open letters. But we as citizens must challenge them each time they come out with these letters. They say, look, what did you do during your own time? That is not.
How does that challenge help us right now? Because challenging them is not the solution to the problem. Yes, they were there. They didn't. Most of them maybe didn't do anything, but how does that help the situation on the ground right now?
It's so that we don't get distracted. So many of these things you're saying, writing letters are also meant to, numb the public consciousness. They pretend as if they're fighting themselves. But wait until there's an election. These same people will get back together and they kind of organize against Nigerian people. I'm saying that because I know that what Nigerians should be doing is actually holding the current government to account over the insecurity of the nation. And we cannot do it simply by, rehashing or quoting letters written by a former head of state. We should get on our feet and force the government to protect, So,
but looking, before this letter came out, everybody has been playing the ostrich, including us, the Nigerians that you're referring to. It's like we more or less wait for someone to start the conversation and then we now band behind the person. So when are we going to grow some?
That's exactly the point. Banding behind a person is an escape. That is not going to help us. That's what I'm saying. You don't band behind people who write letters. You band together to fight for the soul of the country. And when you're going to do this fight, it would also affect the letter writers. That's my position. It's the reason why I contested the election last time, that these older generation leaders are just there deceiving us about their interest in the nation. But whenever an opportunity came for Nigeria to turn the corner, they are the ones standing in that corner to divert Nigeria back into ignominy. And that's very important. It's important to look at that deeply so that we don't keep making the same mistakes of banding behind them. They write the letter, we get excited about it. 2 days later, we have forgotten our problems,
Thank you for leading me to the next question. There is this trend of us, one new thing coming up and then the other one gets cold and it just keeps coming because, maybe to borrow your words, these guys know what they're doing.
Yes.
But if we see through these things, why are we, those of us who are able to see through it, are not necessarily speaking up and trying to point out us in that direction or in the right direction, away from all of these distractions?
No, we speak about it.
Especially people like you.
Yeah, the question is, when I want to speak about it, the mainstream media take my opinion over that of Obasanjo. I remember when we did the election, except for here and a few media houses, the mainstream media in Nigeria would not even interview me when I was going to participate in the debate. They shut me out.
Well, we saw a lot of interviews of you on the papers and on TV. When you blame the mainstream media, you sound like it's part of an agenda. The mainstream media is owned by who?
I mean, if someone is legitimately denied of his participation in a presidential debate, that's an agenda that's been executed.
But you can't use one thing that happened to blame the whole mainstream media.
Let me
because I belong to the mainstream media.
I'm also a media person, so I know what I'm talking about. So let me give you the statistics. All throughout the year that I ran for presidency, even though I was one of the more forceful candidates, traveled around the country, I did not get interviews in more than 20 times in a whole year. The mainstream parties, PDP and APC, gets interviewed probably 20 times a day. Every program, you see a PDP person discussing with the APC person. But those of us who were not seen as mainstream politicians, who had better ideas, who had more forceful conversations that are more engaging about issues affecting Nigeria. We're not given the platform to reach the masses. So we had to devise our own means of reaching and getting our messages across, and they were very effective. But I'm just saying
if they were effective, how come they're not effective now? Because we're talking about how to solve the problem that is on the ground. The federal government somewhat seems to be very silent on this. A lot of people are silent on this.
The
but
federal
for
government
you,
is not only silent, they are complicit in what is happening. And that's the point I'm making, that's the forceful point that needs to be made. But you cannot resolve Nigeria's problem by reading letters that are written by former head of states.
And you haven't answered my question.
Yes.
How do you intend to address this issue? Because you said the means that you were able to get across to Nigerians during your elections and after was effective. So why are you not using that right now?
We're using that. Of course, I do Facebook live broadcast, and I organized yesterday. We had even a march in Lagos with over 200 people, and we are working to get more people involved in ensuring that there is some kind of physical action if that could lead maybe eventually to a revolution in this country. And I'm not afraid to use that word because that's what we need instead of rehashing letters.
How does calling for a revolution address the state of the nation? Nigerians are dying. Hold on, please. Nigerians are dying. People are being kidnapped on a daily basis. Recently is Samson Siasia's mom. And that's because these are famous people, so he makes it to the news. But there are people who are genuinely going about their businesses and they're being kidnapped. We have cultism. We have all sorts of things happening all across the country. How do we deal with that? By asking for a revolution.
So how do you deal with that? By retaining and romancing, or even, in a shallow way, discussing with the people who are the cause of the problem. What revolutions do is they address the root of the matter. They displace people who are complicit and complacent about it. Security is a major issue. It's the #1 right of every citizen. Leaders are held to account first and foremost based on the security of their citizens. It could be social security, physical security, economic security, all kinds of security. If you don't have that, the nation fails. So if you consistently dodge and run away from what needs to be done because those leaders are not responsive and responsible, and you think, by talking to them or talking on TV, they will change. I'm sorry, nothing will change, but when they see seriousness, or in some cases, what revolution do is to change leaders who are irresponsive and irresponsible completely, sweep them out of power and bring in new levels of power, new dynamism that solves the problem. And Nigeria's problem is deeper than just crime. What is fueling crime is unemployment. What is causing unemployment sometimes is corruption. What is causing corruption in times is incompetence and negligence on the part of these leaders. And these leaders are not going to just change overnight simply because somebody wrote a letter to them. But if the citizens rose and said, enough is enough, then people sit up.
Let's talk about the herdsmen issue.
Yes.
At some point we called them the Fulani herdsmen, and then they said, oh, we were being tribalist. We were, stereotyping a segment of society. And with the death of the Afenifere leader's daughter, their name came up again. But there seems, again, to be a silent code or an oath of silence on this issue. Instead, we seem to gloss over it. How do you think we're going to deal with this issue as it is right now?
You see, the word herdsman has become a metaphor for where we are now. And Nigeria is very good at throwing out metaphors when, instead of solving their problems, they look for a culprit. But the question you should ask yourself, yesterday I was saying it somewhere, that probably we should start categorizing herdsmen so that you can have political herdsmen, you have economic herdsmen, depending on the sector you are looking at. Because it's a metaphor for a breakdown of security, lack of dynamic leadership in the country, addressing critically the issues of our existence.
So what does it say about our security apparatus in this country? Because if you,
it has failed. It has failed. So wherever you can find herdsmen, the people we call herdsmen now used to be called unknown gunmen. That was the name we used to call them. I'm in the media. But now it's herdsmen because at least there is some generic derivation from the fact that, we have cattle rustling, there's a lot of banditry linked to, Fulani herdsmen, and everybody just want to believe that every crime committed anywhere now can be attributed to herdsmen. But the question you should ask yourself is, honestly, do you think that the kidnappers who are from Yoruba land just retired and only herdsmen are kidnapping all the Southeast? There was a time it used to be that every kidnapping that was done all the way to Ondo State used to be attributed to Niger Delta militants. So now it has moved to another title.
So you think that this is political?
Is that we are not addressing the issues. Our system has fallen apart. Nigeria has failed as a state. And what states do is that they curb crime. They don't try to attribute crime to, one generic title, because whether you're a herdsman or you're a militant, you are not supposed to have access to weapons and be able to kidnap people or kill people or walk into the middle of the road and start spraying bullets that shoot down people, or you're an assassin. It doesn't matter who you are. The job of the state is to protect and not discriminate when it comes to who is doing it. In fact, it negates the idea of law enforcement to say that a crime committed without investigation has been carried out by people that you believe have done it. We're supposed to determine who the person is after the person has been arrested, tried, and maybe sentenced to prison time or whatever happens to them. But right now, it's even our own escape. It's our own way of escaping the reality of our deteriorating socio-political situation in the country to attribute to anything that happens. Herdsmen, nobody's investigating it. The persons have not been apprehended. Like we were having little conversation before we came on. Even when they apprehend, you can't be sure that people apprehended that people committed a crime.
Talking about the state of the nation, the Nobel laureate Professor Wole Soyinka recently talked about Nigeria having a confab or a conference of sorts to bring everybody, all the stakeholders to the table to have a conversation, because whether we like it or not, we've had the Oni of Ife put out a statement, the Ohaneze Indigo, everybody's saying, hey, we're going to protect ourselves, whatever it is. But if we keep, from those statements, you can tell that there is fire on the mountain, whether we like it or not. But you are, on the other hand, saying talking about this issue is not going to solve it.
It's not going to solve it. Even the conference that we're talking about, if you don't fight for it, you won't get to the genuine conference that can solve the problem. They hold conferences all the time. You see, what these politicians are doing is they're all, there's this noise in the room. They're just increasing the decibel of. But does that not give everybody?
But does that not give everybody an opportunity to say what the problem is and insist that something be done about it?
For example, I have said that the Nigerian Constitution is a sham. It was created by the military that we should have a sovereign national conference. We tried it in 1992 when I was a student at the University of Lagos. We were chased away with tear gas because the political leaders in the country don't want those kind of conversations that change, fundamentally their hold on power. It's all about our resources and how they have access to it. This is not the first time they raise, that there's fire on the mountain, and finally they go into a meeting or a conference, everybody get bribed, taken care of, given contract.
Allegedly.
And then you never hear from them again. We know these things, but if Nigerians bond together and have an organic fight with these people, we will change our country. Okay. Don't let us be cosmetic about it. That's my point.
All right, an organic fight. Thank you very much, Omoyele Sowore, former presidential candidate of the AAC, speaking with us in the studio. Thank you very much.
Thank you.